On a pale winter morning, a woman named Alina Marquez stepped off a battered bus and stared up at the looming iron gate of the Harrington estate. She clutched a thin folder against her chest, her only proof of employment, and took a slow breath. That turned white in the frosty air. She was early, as always. Punctuality had been her invisible armor through years of uncertainty, and today it shielded her once again. She wasn't prepared for what would unfold beyond those gates. She didn't know that a child silent, broken, and hidden from the world was waiting for her in ways no one could have imagined. And she certainly didn't expect to be called mummy by a boy who hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years. But first, she had to walk through that gate. The estate was massive, veiled in quiet opulence. It sat like a memory frozen in time, grand, yet hollow. Ivy clung to the walls like forgotten hands, and the windows wore the dust of years past. Alina, in her late 30s, carried the look of someone who had endured, but not broken. Her clothes were neat but worn, her shoes thin but clean. Her hair, tied in a tight bun, revealed tired eyes that still shimmered with something unnameable. Hope. A voice crackled through the intercom beside the gate. Name, Alina Marquez. She answered softly, stepping closer. I'm the new cleaner. A pause. Then the gate creaked open just enough for her to squeeze through. It felt deliberate, symbolic, as though the house itself was unsure whether to let her in. Inside, the path curved past tall hedges trimmed with perfection, but devoid of life. Statues stood like guardians, their stone faces weathered and tired. As she neared the front entrance, the door opened before she could knock. A woman in a sharply tailored uniform stood there, posture as stiff as her expression. You're late, she said flatly. Alina checked her watch. It's 8:55. My letter said 9 o'clock. You're late when I say you're late, the woman replied, stepping aside. I'm Mrs. Redgrave, head housekeeper. Your quarters are in the west wing. Your uniform is in the drawer. You'll be assigned to the north halls, and you are not to enter the private lounge, the master's study, or most importantly, the boys' wing. Alina nodded once. Understood. Mrs. Redgrave's tone hardened. He's not to be disturbed, not spoken to, not acknowledged if you see him. If he enters a room, you exit. That is the rule. Alina's brows pinched, curiosity flickering behind her eyes. Is he all right? Mrs. Redgrave gave a cold, cutting look. He is quiet, and that's how we prefer him. As the day began, Alina moved silently through the halls, her hands familiar with the rhythm of cleaning. But nothing about this house felt ordinary. The walls whispered with stillness. Rooms looked untouched. Dust gathered in corners where sunlight never reached. In one hallway, an oil painting of a young boy caught her attention. He had soft brown curls and wide grey eyes that seemed to follow her. She read the brass plate beneath. Elias Harrington, age 5 inches, a boy frozen in time. She felt a chill. At lunch, she sat alone at the far end of the service kitchen, unspoken rules hanging heavy around her. The other staff were cordial but distant. No one asked about her, and no one talked about him. The boy. That afternoon, while polishing the brass banisters of the eastern staircase, Alina heard it, a rustle, soft, like feet on carpet. She turned and caught a glimpse, just a flash, a child, small frame, loose shirt, bare feet, darting behind the corner like a shadow. Her heart skipped. She didn't move, didn't speak. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Later, as she swept the hallway outside the library, she passed a cracked door. Inside, she saw him again, this time sitting on the floor, cross-legged, staring at something in his hands. It looked like a photo. She paused. Something instinctive held her still, not to intrude, but to witness. He looked up and their eyes met. Gray, deep, sad beyond his years. And then, he was gone. That evening, as she prepared to leave her shift, she noticed something placed outside her door, a small red marble. It rolled gently toward her toes. She picked it up and smiled. What Alina didn't know, what none of the staff knew, was that Elias had chosen her. For the first time in 3 years, he had looked at someone, and hadn't turned away. The house had been silent for so long, but now, something had shifted. The next morning, Alina woke early, before the sun had even pulled itself over the horizon. She stood by the small window of her room, staring out at the fog-kissed gardens below. She held the red marble in her hand, turning it over gently between her fingers. It was cool and smooth, seemingly ordinary, but something about it felt heavy with meaning. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Somehow, it felt like a secret, a quiet invitation, a beginning. As she stepped into the hallway, the house was cloaked in its usual silence, the kind that didn't come from peace, but from something heavier like grief that never quite left. She passed the old grandfather clock on the second-floor landing. It still worked, but it never chimed. The staff said the sound upset the boy, so they disabled it years ago. Now, it only ticked softly, as though whispering time instead of announcing it. Elena's first assignment was the upstairs study, the one right before the corridor to the boys' wing. She'd been warned not to go further, but as she opened the study door, she paused. The faintest sound, barely more than a breath, drifted from the hallway beyond. Not footsteps, not talking, just a presence. She stepped into the study, leaving the door open behind her. Dust danced in the pale light that poured in through the tall windows. She moved slowly, letting the quiet guide her. Then, from the corner of her eye, something moved. There he was, Elias, standing at the end of the hall, partially hidden behind a carved column. His eyes watched her, wide but unafraid. Elena didn't say a word. Instead, she pulled a soft cloth from her apron pocket and began wiping the desk, acting as though she hadn't seen him yet. Every movement was gentle, deliberate, open. And then, in a moment so brief she might have doubted it later, Elias took a step forward. Only one, but it was enough. She looked up, offering the smallest smile. Not too much, just enough to say, "I see you. I'm not afraid of you. I won't make you speak. I'm here." He didn't return the smile, but he didn't run either. That was more than anyone else had managed in years. Later that afternoon, Elena was in the laundry room folding towels when she found something tucked into the pocket of her apron, a tiny wooden toy car, chipped at the edges, painted red. Another gift, or maybe a message. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of those eyes, gray and hollow, but watching, reaching, in a way that didn't need words. She wondered who had once loved him, who had brushed his hair, read him stories, kissed his scraped knees. She wondered how much he remembered, and how much he tried to forget. In the weeks that followed, Elias continued to appear, briefly, silently. He would never be close enough to touch, but never far enough to be ignored. Elena began to leave little things in the rooms she cleaned, nothing much. A folded paper boat by the window, a line of dominoes near the baseboard, an open book with a drawing of a smiling fox. They disappeared every time. He never left them where she placed them. He took them. She knew it. And then one day, something changed. She was dusting the base of the spiral staircase in the east wing when a soft sound broke the air. Not footsteps, not furniture, something else, a hum. Low, shaky, barely there. She turned her head slowly. Elias stood 3 steps up the stairs, holding one of the paper boats she had made. His lips were parted just slightly, and a sound, fragile, uncertain, came from his throat. It wasn't speech, but it wasn't silence either. Elena didn't move. She didn't speak. She just listened. And when the boy looked at her, his expression changed. There was fear, yes, but beneath it, something else. Need. Later that evening, Mrs. Redgrave pulled her aside. The head housekeeper's eyes were narrowed, her voice low. "I saw you near the boy today." Elena kept her tone neutral. "He walked past. I didn't speak to him. You've been here a month. You've done your work, but let me be clear. This house does not exist to comfort ghosts. The child is not your responsibility." Elena said nothing. She didn't argue, but inside her, something pushed back. She had been many things in her life: daughter, wife, mother, widow, cleaner, survivor. But there was something in that boy that echoed inside her, a loneliness that called to hers, and it was getting louder. That night, she placed the red marble back on her nightstand. Next to it, she added the wooden car and the smallest paper boat she had made yet. She whispered, "Come if you need." She didn't expect anything to happen, but she woke at midnight to a sound. Not loud, not urgent, a tap, just one. She sat up. The door to her small room was open, only slightly. On the floor just inside, the paper boat was gone, and in its place, a child's drawing, done in pencil, a woman with a bun, a boy, a boat between them, and at the top, written in small, unsteady letters that took effort, was one word: "Mummy." Her breath caught. She picked it up with trembling fingers. The boy hadn't spoken in 3 years. He still hadn't, but he had written. A single word. a word so heavy it nearly brought her to her knees. She pressed the drawing to her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. This wasn't just about cleaning anymore. This was about healing. And whether she had permission or not, she was going to fight for that boy, even if the whole house stood against her, even if it meant uncovering the secrets no one wanted told, because someone had to be brave enough to stand in the silence and answer. The next morning, Alina didn't walk the halls the same way. Something inside her had shifted quietly, powerfully, like the slow turning of the tide. She still wore the same uniform, still carried the same supply cart, but her heart moved differently now. She wasn't just cleaning rooms anymore. She was watching for signs, listening for footsteps, hoping for another tap on the door, another drawing, another chance. The child had reached out. He had written "Mummy," and even if no one else believed it meant anything, she did by the time the morning sun filtered through the ivy-covered windows. She had already cleaned 2 halls and arranged fresh towels in the guest rooms. As she entered the 3rd-floor sitting room, she noticed something peculiar. One of the picture frames on the fireplace mantel was gone. She had dusted it just yesterday. Now, in its place, was something else. A folded napkin, carefully placed, clean, and drawn on it, with the faint grey lines of a pencil, was a single balloon floating upward, tied to nothing. Her throat tightened. She tucked the napkin into her apron before anyone else could see. This was their secret. The boy was speaking in his way. He was floating messages out into a world that had ignored him too long. Later, she passed by the boys' corridor and noticed the door at the far end. The one no one touched was slightly ajar, not wide, just enough to tempt curiosity, enough to test trust. Alina hesitated. Her mind whispered all the rules, all the warnings, all the ways this could go wrong. But her heart remembered the drawing, so she stepped forward. Every inch of that hallway felt sacred and fragile, like walking across frozen glass. The walls were lined with framed photos, but the faces in them were always turned, blurred, or taken from behind, as if the family had been trying to preserve their privacy, even from themselves. At the door, she paused, then pushed gently. The room was warm, softly lit. Toys lined the shelves, untouched but carefully arranged. A rocking chair sat in the corner with a blanket folded over its back. It was the first room in the entire house that felt loved, not just designed, lived in. And there, on the rug by the window, sat Elias. He didn't look up when she entered. He held a stuffed rabbit in one hand, threadbare and missing one ear. In the other, he clutched a notebook, the kind with wide-ruled pages and a blue cover. Alina knelt a short distance away, not wanting to break the moment. "I had a rabbit just like that once," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name was Milo. He lost both ears by the end." Elias didn't respond, but his grip on the rabbit loosened just a little. Then, slowly, he slid the notebook toward her. She picked it up carefully. On the open page, written in uneven letters, was a single question. "Are you staying?" Alina felt something catch in her chest. She looked at the boy, her eyes soft. "Do you want me to?" Elias gave the smallest of nods. From behind them, a sudden sound, a sharp intake of breath. Mrs. Redgrave stood in the doorway, her face pale with disbelief. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "You were told never to enter this room." Alina rose slowly, protecting the boy with her body, even though he hadn't moved. "I didn't enter. I was invited." The housekeeper's eyes flicked to the boy, who now looked directly at her. There was no fear, no retreat, just quiet defiance. "You're overstepping, Alina," Mrs. Redgrave said tightly. "He's not your concern." But Alina didn't back down. "He's someone's concern," she said gently, "and it looks like he's trying to be heard." The housekeeper's lips thinned. "That child hasn't spoken a word in years. He doesn't want to be heard. He wants peace." Alina looked at the notebook, still open on the floor. "No," she said. "He wants connection." That night, Alina didn't sleep in her bed. She sat by the small writing desk in her room, the notebook open before her, staring at the boy's question over and over. "Are you staying?" It wasn't just about the job. It wasn't about dust or rules or silence. It was about being someone who doesn't leave, about showing up, about staying when no one else would. In the days that followed, something remarkable began to happen. Elias didn't speak, but he came closer. He left more drawings. He shared pieces of his world. A leaf, a button, a photograph of a woman Alina guessed was his mother. And then, one afternoon, she found a music box outside her room. When she opened it, it played a soft lullaby. Inside, taped to the lid, was a small note, not written by him. "Stop, before you break what cannot be fixed." She froze. The handwriting was neat, formal, clearly an adult. Someone knew, someone was watching. That night, the boy didn't visit. No taps, no drawings, just silence. But it was a different kind of silence. A warning. The next morning, Alina was summoned to the library by Mr. Harrington himself. She had never seen him before, not properly. She had only heard footsteps, distant voices, once a car door slamming late at night. But now she was standing before the man who owned everything, was tall, stern, impeccably dressed. His eyes were hard, his voice calm. "You've been developing a relationship with my son," he said, "unapproved, unwanted." "I haven't spoken a word to him," she said carefully. "He's come to me, and you encouraged it. He needs something. He needs stability. You are temporary." Alina met his gaze. So was his mother. So was everyone, apparently. The air grew colder. "You're fired," he said simply. "Pack your things. Be gone by nightfall." She stood frozen. She had made progress. She had reached him. She had stayed. And now, just like everyone else, she was being forced to go. But Elias had chosen her, and she wasn't leaving without a fight. Because the boy who had been silent for years had finally spoken, maybe, not with his mouth, but with his soul. And that was a voice worth listening to. Even if it cost her everything. The moment the library door shut behind her, Alina felt the weight of finality pressed down on her chest. Fired, just like that. No chance to explain, no hearing, no voice. She was to be gone by nightfall. Like dust from the furniture she had spent her days quietly wiping away. But she couldn't move. Her legs refused. Because this wasn't just about losing a job. It wasn't about cleaning, or disobedience, or violating invisible rules. It was about the boy, about Elias, and something told her no, screamed at her that walking away now would leave more than a room empty. It would leave a wound wide open. He had trusted her. He had asked if she would stay, and now she was being pulled away like every other person who had once dared to care. By the time she made it back to her small quarters, the sun had already begun to dip behind the trees. A heavy silence had settled over the estate. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. She packed slowly, her hands mechanical, a dress, her notebook, the red marble, the toy car, the napkin with the balloon. Every memory reduced to a small pile of objects. At the very bottom of her drawer, she found the drawing, the one with the word mummy, scribbled across the top. Her fingers trembled as she held it. It was more than paper. It was a vow, a whisper, a lifeline. And then, without warning, a small sound came from the hallway. Not a tap this time, not footsteps. It was humming, unsteady, delicate, the same soft tune the music box had played. She opened the door slowly. There, sitting cross-legged on the cold floor, was Elias, the rabbit in one hand, his notebook in the other. He looked up at her, eyes shadowed with something between panic and hope. He held up the notebook again. This time he hadn't written a question. He had written a sentence. "I heard him yell." Alina dropped to her knees. When she whispered. Elias blinked. A tear slipped down his cheek. He turned the page. The night before she left, it was the first time he had acknowledged his mother's absence. Something inside Alina twisted. Sharply, what did he say? Elias didn't answer with words. He flipped to the next page. A drawing, crude, childlike. A tall man standing over a woman in a chair. The man's mouth open wide. The woman's hands covering her ears. And in the background hidden, smaller boy under the table, watching silent. Everything inside Alina screamed. This wasn't just grief. This was trauma. This was buried pain no one had dared to name. No wonder the boy had stopped speaking. No wonder he called her mummy. It wasn't confusion. It was hope. He was trying to rewrite the story, but someone had made it. Forbidden, Alina took Elias's hands gently in hers. "I'm not going to leave you," she said. "Even if they throw me out, I'll come back. I swear to you, I'll find a way." A sudden knock at the far end of the hallway broke the moment. It was Mrs. Redgrave. "Alina," she said, voice strained. "He's waiting downstairs. He wants you off the property. Now." Elias flinched. Alina rose slowly. "1 minute. You don't have a minute. Then take me by force," she said calmly. "But I'm not leaving without saying goodbye." The housekeeper hesitated. Her stern exterior cracked, just slightly, and in that crack, Alina saw a flicker of guilt, of doubt. Alina Redgrave began, softer now. You don't understand how deep this goes, then help me understand. The woman swallowed hard, then turned and walked away. Elias tugged her sleeve. He opened the notebook to the final page. Written there, barely legible, were 2 words. She cried. Alina looked at him. Your mother. He nodded. She cried before she left. He nodded again, then shook his head, then wrote something else. She didn't leave. The chill that ran through Alina wasn't from the air. It was from something darker. She crouched to meet his eyes. Do you know where she went? Elias stared at her, then pointed downward. The basement. Alina's breath caught. No one goes down there, she whispered. He nodded again. Something had happened. And Elias remembered. And no one had listened. Not until now. She stood, heart pounding. She had to make a choice. Obey and leave. Or stay and dig. She reached for his hand. Will you show me? He hesitated, then slowly placed his hand in hers. Together, they slipped down the back stairwell, avoiding the main halls. The house had grown darker, the shadows longer. Elena's mind raced. Had someone hurt her, hidden her, lied? The basement door groaned as they pushed it open. Dust spiraled in the light of a single bulb above. They stepped down the wooden steps, one at a time. The air was thick, musty, heavy with memory. Elias let go of her hand and moved toward a pile of old boxes. He crouched, lifted one. Underneath it, a trapdoor, barely noticeable, old, splintering. Her hands shook as she opened it. A dark tunnel stretched beneath, low, narrow. What is this? She breathed. Elias didn't answer. He just pointed, and for the first time, Alina felt fear that ran deeper than the silence of the boy or the grief in the walls. There was something buried. Here. Not just sadness, not just silence, but truth. And once they uncovered it, nothing in this house would ever be the same again. The air inside the tunnel was unlike anything Alina had ever breathed. It was thick, almost syrupy, full of secrets that had long ago soured and settled into the very walls. Every step downward felt like a descent, not just into the estate's hidden basement, but into a buried chapter of a life no one had dared to read. Elias clutched her hand tightly now, more firmly than ever. He hadn't spoken a word, hadn't made a sound, but his body said everything. He was leading her to the heart of something too heavy for his small shoulders to carry alone anymore. The light from the bulb above barely reached beyond the trapdoor. Alina found a flashlight in a box near the stairs. Old thing, batteries nearly drained, but enough to cut a pale beam through the dark. As they stepped into the crawl space, the smell hit her first. Dust, mildew, and something else, something metallic, something ancient. Alina swallowed hard. Are you sure? Elias nodded once. The corridor was lined with old wooden shelves, storage long forgotten, jars of pickled vegetables, stacks of folded linens yellowed with time. But at the far end, beneath a thick covering of canvas tarp, stood something out of place. A trunk. Large, locked. Elias moved ahead of her, crouched, and gently brushed away the dust with the edge of his sleeve. His fingers traced the edge of the lock. And then he stepped back. Alina crouched. The lock wasn't sealed, it was broken. The clasp had been snapped, not recently, but long ago. She hesitated only for a moment before lifting the lid. Inside were clothes, women's clothes, folded neatly, lovingly, a scarf with faded perfume, a pair of reading glasses, a letter, sealed in a plain envelope with no name. Alina picked it up. Do you recognize this? She whispered. Elias gave the faintest nod. She broke the seal carefully. Inside, the handwriting was elegant, steady, but the words were soaked in grief. To whoever finds this, I fear I won't be here when you do. I loved my son more than my own life, but this house, this silence, it devours everything. If he grows quiet, please know it's not his fault. He saw too much, and I was too afraid. Tell him I never wanted to leave him. I wanted to fight, but I ran out of time. Emily blinked back, the sting in her eyes. The letter was real. It confirmed what her heart had already begun to suspect. Elias hadn't just lost a mother. He had watched her disappear, and no one had ever answered his silent question. Why? A sound echoed from above. Footsteps, fast, heavy voices. Elena, are you down there? Mr. Harrington, and someone else. Mrs. Redgrave. Elias's eyes widened. Alina gently folded the letter and tucked it into her apron. "Stay here," she whispered. "Just for a minute. I promise I'll come back." But Elias grabbed her sleeve and shook his head violently. He didn't want to be alone again, not even for a second. "Alina," the voice was closer, furious. "I said you're not to be anywhere near that boy." She rose, pulling Elias close to her side. They climbed back up the narrow steps. Just as the door above burst open, Mr. Harrington loomed in the frame, his face pale with rage, jaw clenched tight. Behind him, Mrs. Redgrave looked torn, uncertain. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" he snapped. Alina didn't flinch. "There's something wrong here, something buried, and your son knows it. He's confused. You filled his head with nonsense. I found her letter." That stopped him. Silence. The color drained slowly from his face. "What letter?" Alina pulled it from her apron. "Your wife. She left this. It was with her things in the trunk." Mr. Harrington took a step forward, but Elias stepped in front of Alina. It was the first time he had done that. Protected someone. He glared at his father, not with fear, but with fury. Mr. Harrington froze. "Let me read it," he said finally. "No," Alina said. "Elias should read it. When he's ready." Something cracked then, not loud, not dramatic. Just the subtle collapse of a wall that had been held up too long. Mr. Harrington looked at his son for a long time, and what he saw there, something unspoken, something undeniable, staggered him. Without another word, he turned and left the hallway. Mrs. Redgrave lingered. "Alina," she said softly, "you need to be careful." Alina met her eyes. "Why?" "Because this house is built on silence, and silence, when disturbed, has a way of collapsing everything it holds up." Alina gently squeezed Elias's shoulder, then let it collapse. Later that evening, they sat together in the boys' room. For the first time, Elias let her open the music box. Together, they listened to the lullaby again, but this time, he reached over and placed the drawing back in her lap, the one that said, "Mummy." Then, slowly, quietly, he whispered, "Don't go." It was a voice rough with disuse, fragile as paper, but it was a voice, his voice, and for Alina, it was the most powerful sound she had ever heard. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows of the east corridor like golden silk, as if the house itself was finally beginning to breathe again. For the first time since Alina had arrived at the Harrington estate, it no longer felt like a place frozen in grief. It felt ... alive, but there was still so much to face. Elias had spoken. The word "don't" still echoed in her ears, soft and trembling, but it had been real. A single word, yes, but a storm beneath it. The dam had cracked, and now the truth wanted out. Alina hadn't slept much. She sat in the small room they had given her for one more night, perhaps her last, rereading the letter from Elias's mother. Every word carried weight, like footsteps across hollow floors. She knew now what she had to do, not just stay, but stand up. When she stepped into the dining hall, it was quiet but not empty. Mr. Harrington was already seated at the head of the long table, eyes heavy, hair disheveled. Across from him sat a woman she hadn't seen before, elegant, sharp-featured, with a leather folder in her lap. A lawyer. Mrs. Redgrave was standing stiffly near the doorway, as if unsure whether she was still part of this house or just a relic of it. Alina entered. Without hesitation, "I asked to speak to you both," Mr. Harrington said gruffly, without looking up. "Before you go." "I'm not going," she replied. That made him look. "You don't get to make that choice." "I do now," she said, stepping closer. "Because your son does." The woman beside him raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry." "And you are?" "Alina." "Martin, I was hired to clean, but I stayed to listen." There was a pause, a long one. Mr. Harrington set his glass down. "You've said enough." "No," she said, voice firm. "I haven't said nearly enough." She pulled the folded drawing from her pocket, the one Elias had made, the one that said "Mummy." And then she placed the letter beside it. "I know what this house has been hiding, and I think deep down, so do you." The lawyer leaned in, scanning the letter quickly, her eyes widening. "Where did you get this?" "It was hidden with her things. In a trunk beneath the basement floor." "Basement?" the woman echoed, stunned. Mr. Harrington's face went pale. "That letter was never meant to be found." "But it was," Alina said, "and not by accident. Elias led me there. He remembered everything. He saw what happened. He just didn't know how to say it, until now." Silence rippled through the room. Alina stepped closer. Your wife didn't leave. She disappeared. She was scared. And Elias was left to carry that silence alone. No one helped him. No one listened. But now you can. Mr. Harrington looked like he had aged years in a matter of minutes. What do you want from me? He said finally, voice broken. Forgiveness. I want you to look at your son, she replied. Not as a burden, or a mystery, or a reminder, but as a child. Your child. One who still has a chance to heal if you let him. Mrs. Redgrave stepped forward then, slowly. She's right. I knew something was wrong for years. I saw the fear in her eyes, your wife, and I ignored it because I thought it wasn't my place. I won't make that mistake again. The lawyer cleared her throat. This letter, legally speaking, it changes things. There are implications, estate matters, custody issues, guardianship questions. I don't care about any of that, Alina interrupted. I care about the boy. It was then that Elias entered the room. He didn't run. He walked, slowly, steadily. The rabbit in one hand, the notebook in the other. He climbed onto the chair beside Alina and placed the notebook on the table. Everyone watched. He opened it to a blank page, and he began to draw. Not stick figures. This time, not shadows. He drew a garden with sunlight, and a woman with long hair and a smile, holding hands with a boy. When he finished, he passed it across the table, to his father. Mr. Harrington picked it up with trembling hands. Is that her? He asked softly. Elias nodded. Is that me? Another nod. And her? He asked, pointing at the third figure. Elias looked at Alina and smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen it. She saved him. Mrs. Redgrave said quietly. No, Alina whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Elias's forehead. He saved me, too. Outside, the housekeepers had gathered. They had heard whispers, rumors. Some thought Alina would be fired. Some thought she'd be removed by security. But instead, she stood with Elias as Mr. Harrington addressed them all for the first time in years. I've failed in many ways, he admitted, voice low but clear. I let my grief become a wall. I let my silence become punishment. But from this day forward, this house will not be ruled by what we lost. It will be guided by what we still have. Later that week, the estate underwent changes. Rooms once locked were opened. The basement was sealed and transformed into a sunroom, and in the garden, new roses were planted, red ones. Elias chose them. Every afternoon, Alina and Elias sat in the sunroom with books and tea. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't, but they were always together. And each evening before bedtime, Elias would whisper one word, stay, and she always did, because love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it appears in dusted corners, quiet nods, silent tears, and drawings of a better tomorrow. Alina came to clean a house. Instead, she helped rebuild a home, not by erasing the past but by helping a little boy find the courage to speak, the strength to feel, and the heart to heal. And in doing so, she healed herself, too.